Chapter 1. One sunny afternoon in June, around 5:30, when the sun was shining warmly in the big courtyard, a fancy carriage pulled up in front of the grand house. The Lady of Mascaret came down the steps just as her husband arrived in the driveway. He stopped for a moment, watching his wife and turning a bit pale. The Countess was very pretty, elegant, and looked special with her long, oval face, her skin like smooth ivory, her big gray eyes, and her black hair. She got into her carriage without even looking at him, as if she hadn't noticed him at all. This made him very jealous, and the jealousy he had been feeling for a long time began to eat at his heart again. He walked up to her and asked, "Are you going for a ride?" She replied in a proud way,
"Yes, I am."
"To the park?"
"Most likely."
"Can I come with you?"
"The carriage is yours."
He didn't seem surprised by her tone. He got in and sat next to his wife, saying, "To the park." The footman sat next to the coachman, and the horses, as always, pranced and moved their heads as they started moving. Husband and wife sat next to each other without saying anything. He was thinking about how to start a conversation, but she had such a stubborn and cold look that he didn't dare to try. Finally, he tried something tricky and casually touched the Countess's gloved hand with his own. She quickly pulled her arm away with a look of disgust. This made him thoughtful, even though he was usually a strong and controlling person. He said, "Gabrielle,
"What do you want?"
I think you look lovely." She didn't say anything, but stayed reclined in the carriage, looking like an annoyed queen. By that time, they were driving on a fancy Paris street, heading towards the Arc of Victory. This big monument, at the end of the long avenue, stood with its massive arch against the red sky. The Count of Mascaret continued, "My dear Gabrielle." She couldn't hold back any longer and replied in an irritated voice,
"Oh, please leave me alone. I can't even have my carriage to myself now."
He acted like he didn't hear her and went on, "You've never looked as pretty as you do today." Her patience ran out, and she answered with unstoppable anger,
"You're wrong to notice, because I promise I won't have anything to do with you in that way again."
The Count was quite surprised and upset, and his angry nature took over as he said, "What do you mean by that?" in a tone that sounded more like a boss than a lover. She replied quietly, so the servants in the noisy carriage wouldn't hear,
What do I mean by that? What do I mean by that? Now I see your true colors again. Do you want me to tell the truth?
"Yes."
Everything that's been bothering me since I've been the victim of your extreme selfishness?
He turned red with surprise and anger and grumbled between his closed teeth, "Yes, tell me everything." He was a tall, broad-shouldered man, with a big red beard, a handsome man, a nobleman, a man of the world, who was seen as a perfect husband and an excellent father. Now, for the first time since they started, she turned toward him and looked right at his face.
You're going to hear some unpleasant things, but you should know that I'm ready for anything, and I fear nothing, especially not you today."
He was also looking into her eyes and was already shaking with anger as he said in a low voice, "You're crazy."
No, but I won't be the victim of the awful burden of motherhood that you've forced on me for 11 years. I want to have my place in society as I deserve, just like all women have the right to.
He suddenly turned pale again and stammered, "I don't understand you."
Oh, yes, you understand me very well. It's been 3 months since I had my last child, and since I'm still very beautiful, and despite all your efforts, you haven't ruined my figure, as you just noticed when you saw me on the doorstep. You think it's time for me to have another child.
But you're talking nonsense.
No, I'm not. I'm 30 years old, and I've had 7 children. We've been married for 11 years, and you hope this will go on for 10 more years, after which you'll stop being jealous.
He grabbed her arm and squeezed it, saying, "I won't let you talk to me like that much longer."
I'll keep talking to you until I'm finished, and if you try to stop me, I'll raise my voice so the 2 servants on the carriage might hear. I brought you with me for this reason. I have these witnesses who will make you listen to me and behave. So pay attention to what I say. I've always disliked you, and I've always shown it because I've never lied, sir. You married me against my will. You pressured my parents, who were in financial trouble, to give me to you because you were wealthy. They forced me to marry you, despite my tears. So, you bought me, and as soon as I was in your control, as soon as I became your partner, willing to be with you, to forget your forceful and threatening behavior, just so I could remember to be a devoted wife and love you as much as I could, you became jealous. More jealous than any man ever was, with the low, base jealousy of a spy. It was degrading to both of us. I hadn't been married 8 months when you suspected me of betraying you and even accused me. What a shame! And since you couldn't stop me from being beautiful and attracting people, from being called one of the most beautiful women in Paris in drawing rooms and newspapers, you did everything you could to keep admirers away from me. You came up with the awful idea of making me spend my life in constant motherhood until I became unattractive to every man. Don't deny it. I didn't understand it at first, but then I figured it out. You even bragged about it to your sister, who told me because she cares about me and was disgusted by your crude behavior. Remember how you've behaved in the past. For 11 years, you've made me give up society and be a mother to your children. Then you grew tired of me, and I was sent to the family chateau in the countryside among fields and meadows. When I returned, fresh, pretty, and untouched, still attractive and surrounded by admirers, hoping that I could finally live more like a wealthy young woman in society, you got jealous again. You started tormenting me with that terrible, hateful desire from which you're suffering right now next to me. It's not the desire to possess me, as I'd never refuse you. It's the wish to make me unattractive. And then that terrible and mysterious thing happened, which took me a long time to understand, but I got sharp by watching your thoughts and actions. You became attached to your children while I was pregnant with them. You felt affection for them despite your dislike for me and your low fears, which were temporarily eased by seeing me lose my figure. Oh, how many times I've noticed that joy in you. I've seen it in your eyes and guessed it. You loved your children like they were victories, not because they were your own flesh and blood. They were victories over me, over my youth, over my beauty, over my charms, over the compliments people gave me and those whispered about me behind my back. And you're proud of them, showing them off, taking them on rides. You take them to theater, so people can see you with them and say, "What a kind father."
He had grabbed her wrist brutally and squeezed it so hard that she fell silent, nearly crying out from the pain. In a harsh whisper, he said to her, "I love my children, do you hear me? What you just told me is terrible for a mother. But you belong to me, I'm your master, and I can demand whatever I want from you, whenever I want. And I have the law on my side." He was trying to crush her fingers with his strong, muscular hand, and she, pale with pain, tried in vain to free them from his grip. The agony made her breathe heavily, and tears filled her eyes. "You see that I'm the master and the stronger," he said. When he eased his grip slightly, she asked him,
"Do you think I'm a religious woman?"
He was surprised and stammered, "Yes."
"Do you think I could lie in a church?"
"No."
"Will you go with me to a church?"
"Why?"
"You'll see." "Will you?"
"If you really want to, yes." She raised her voice and called out the coachman. The coachman, leaning slightly without taking his eyes off the horses, seemed to direct his ear toward his mistress alone. She continued,
"Drive to St. Philippe Church."
Husband and wife didn't exchange any more words during the ride. When the carriage stopped in front of the church, Lady of Mascaret got out and entered it, followed by the Count a few yards behind. She went straight to the choir screen and knelt in a chair, burying her face in her hands. She prayed for a long time, and he, standing behind her, could see that she was crying. She wept quietly, the way women do when they are in deep, painful sorrow. Her body trembled with silent sobs, hidden and stifled by her fingers. But the Mr. Mascaret felt that the situation had dragged on too long, so he gently touched her shoulder. His touch brought her back to reality, as if she had been startled, and she got up and looked directly into his eyes.
"This is what I need to tell you. I'm not afraid of anything, no matter what you do to me. You can even kill me if you want to. Only one of your children is not really yours, I swear this before God, who hears me here. This was the only way I could get back at you for all your awful male dominance, for the hard work of childbirth you forced on me. Who was my lover? You'll never find out. You can suspect anyone, but you won't discover the truth. I was with him without love or pleasure, only to betray you, and he also made me a mother. Which child is it? That's something you'll never know either. I have 7 children, try to figure out which one. I had planned to tell you this later because deceiving a man is not revenge unless he knows it. Today, you've pushed me to confess it. I'm done now."
She rushed through the church towards the open door, expecting to hear her husband's quick footsteps chasing her and perhaps being knocked down by a punch, but she heard nothing. She reached her carriage, jumped into it in a hurry, overwhelmed with fear. Out of breath, she called out to the coachman, "Home," and the horses quickly started trotting away. Chapter 2. The Lady of Mascaret waited in her room for dinner like someone condemned to die awaits their execution. She wondered what her husband was planning to do. Was he back home? He was dictatorial, passionate, and ready for any violence. What was going on in his mind? The house was silent, and she kept glancing at the clock. Lady's maid had prepared her for the evening and left the room. When the clock struck 8, there were 2 knocks at the door, and the butler came in to announce dinner.
Has Mr. Mascaret returned?
Yes, madam. He's in the dining room. For a moment, she considered taking a small revolver she had bought earlier, anticipating the tragedy that was unfolding in her heart. However, she remembered that all the children would be there, so she only took a bottle of smelling salts. Mr. Mascaret rose from his chair with a certain formality. They exchanged a brief nod and sat down. The 3 boys, along with their tutor, Abbé Martin, clergyman, sat on her right, while the 3 girls, with Miss Smith, their English governess, sat on her left. The youngest child, just 3 months old, remained upstairs with his nurse. As usual when there were no guests, the abbé, clergyman, said the prayer. Then they started dinner. The Countess, overwhelmed with emotion she hadn't expected, kept her eyes down, while Mr. Mascaret looked uncertain and unhappy as he glanced from one child to another. He suddenly pushed his wineglass away, causing it to shatter and spill wine on the tablecloth. This slight noise startled the Countess, who jumped from her chair, and for the first time, they looked at each other. The abbé, sensing an underlying tension, tried to initiate a conversation on various topics. The Countess attempted to respond a few times, but failed to find words amid the confusion in her mind. Her voice seemed almost loud in the silence of the spacious room, where only the faint sounds of plates and cutlery could be heard. Suddenly, her husband leaned forward and asked her, "Here, among your children, will you swear to me that what you told me earlier is true?" Her hatred, simmering within her, suddenly surged, and she answered his question with the same determination she had shown in their exchanged glances. She raised both her hands, one pointing toward the boys and the other toward the girls, and said firmly and resolutely, without hesitation,
I swear on my children's lives that I have told you the truth.
He got up, angrily threw his napkin on the table, flung his chair against the wall, and left without saying another word. The Countess let out a deep sigh, as if after a small victory, and spoke calmly.
Don't pay any attention to what your father just said, my dears. He was very upset a little while ago, but he'll be fine again in a few days.
When dinner was over, she led her children into the drawing room. She engaged the older ones in conversation, and when it was time for them to go to bed, she kissed them lovingly, one by one, before heading to her room alone. She waited, as she had no doubt that her husband would come. Since her children weren't with her, she decided to protect herself as any worldly woman would protect her life. In the pocket of her dress, she placed a small loaded revolver she had purchased a few days earlier. The hours passed, and the house fell into silence. She waited, filled with nervous energy, and was no longer afraid of him. But the first light of dawn crept in beneath her curtains, and he had not entered her room. She was surprised to realize that he wasn't coming. She locked and bolted her door for added security, eventually climbed into bed, keeping her eyes open, thinking, and trying to understand it all, unable to guess what he was planning to do. When her maid brought her tea, she also handed her a letter from her husband. In the letter, he informed her that he was embarking on an extended journey and added in a postscript that his lawyer would provide her with any money she needed for her expenses. Chapter 3. After 6 years, the Count and Countess Mascaret were sitting side by side in the carriage on their way home from the opera. They were not speaking, but suddenly the husband, Mr. Mascaret, said to his wife, "Gabrielle? Gabrielle!"
What do you want?
She replied. "Don't you think this has gone on long enough?" he asked.
What?
She inquired. "The terrible punishment you've inflicted on me for the last 6 years," he said.
What do you want? I can't help it.
She replied. "Then tell me which of our children is not mine," he pleaded. "I swear I'll forgive you and treat that child like the others."
I can't do that.
She said. "Can't you see that I can't go on living like this, with this constant doubt?" he continued. "Tell me which child it is, and I promise to let go of this torment. I'll treat them all equally."
I don't have the right to do that.
She said. "Can't you understand that I can't bear this life, this constant question that haunts me every time I look at them?" he cried. "It's driving me mad."
Have you truly suffered so much?
She asked. "Yes, terribly," he replied. "Would I have endured living beside you and the unbearable thought that one of them is not mine? Should I have stayed in that house, near you and them, if I didn't love them? You've treated me abominably. I've given all my love to our children, and you know that. For them, I'm a father of the olden times, just as I used to be for you, a husband of an old-fashioned family. By instinct, I've remained a natural man, a man from another era. Yes, I'll admit it, you've made me intensely jealous, because you are of a different nature, with different needs. I'll never forget the things you said to me, but from that day, I stopped worrying about you. I didn't harm you because then I'd have no way to find out which of your children isn't mine. I've waited, but I've suffered more than you could ever imagine. I can't love them anymore, except maybe the 2 eldest. I can't look at them, call them, kiss them without wondering, is it this one? For 6 years, I've kept my distance and behaved correctly toward you, even kindly and accommodating. Tell me the truth, and I swear I won't do anything unkind." In the darkness of the carriage, Mr. Mascaret thought he sensed his wife's emotions, and he begged her once more, "I beg you to tell me the truth." She finally replied,
I have been more guilty than you might think, but I could no longer bear the constant cycle of motherhood. I had no choice but to drive you away from me. I lied before God, and I lied with my hand on our children's heads. I never cheated you.
He grasped her arm in the darkness, squeezing it as he had done on that fateful day in the park. He stammered, "Is that true?" She affirmed.
It is true.
Torn with grief, he groaned, "I'll have fresh doubts that will never end." "When did you lie, the last time or now? How can I believe you now? How can one believe a woman after that? I will never know what to think." The carriage arrived in the house's courtyard, and they alighted. After climbing the stairs, the Count asked, "May I speak to you for a few more moments?" She agreed, saying,
I am willing.
They entered a small drawing room, and a footman, a bit surprised, lit the wax candles. Once they were alone, the Count continued, "How can I know the truth? I've asked you 1,000 times to speak, but you've remained silent, and now today, you tell me that you've been lying. For 6 years, you've let me believe such a thing. No, you are lying now, I don't know why, but perhaps out of pity for me?" She responded with sincerity.
If I hadn't lied, I would have had 4 more children in the last 6 years.
Can a mother speak like that?
Oh,
She said.
I don't feel like the mother of children who were never born. It's enough for me to be the mother of those I have and to love them with all my heart. I am a woman of the civilized world, sir, we all are. We refuse to be mere females to restock the earth.
She stood up, but he held her hands. Just one word, Gabrielle. Tell me the truth.
I just told you. I never dishonored or cheated you.
He looked deeply into her face, admiring her beauty with her gray eyes. Finally, he said, "I believe you. At this moment, I feel that you are not lying. Before, I merely thought you were." She extended her hand to him, asking,
So, we are friends now?
He took her hand, kissed it, and replied, "We are friends." "Thank you, Gabrielle."